Okay, I think we can start. Welcome, everyone. My name is Marion Wehack, and I'm a production designer based in Toronto, and I'm also the National Directors Guild of Canada Art Department rep. And again, welcome to tonight's All Art, the Director Designer Collaboration. I appreciate that you come out to the Zoom tonight. The DGC All Art series has proven extremely popular to attendees from across Canada, the US, and as far away as India and New Zealand, with the primary intent being to create a forum that can be collectively enjoyed and valued as a way to share, learn, and amplify the work that we do in the art department and within the creativity of the film industry. It's a great pleasure that I welcome so many of you today from across the geographical divide. And as Julian put into the chat, please let us know where you're zooming in from. Tonight, I will be moderating what I know will be a fascinating conversation between director Marie Clements and production designer James Philpott, as they discuss the creative collaboration that lifted Marie's script of Bones of Crows off of the page and turned it into a compelling and stunningly visual, large arc narrative that spans 100 years. I look forward to introducing you to our guests in just a few minutes, but first, a few things I need to mention. To allow the hour-long conversation to flow with ease, we'll reserve questions for the end. Yet as questions or comments come to mind, feel free to type them into the Q&A. And in about 70 minutes, we'll present your questions to our guests and have about a 15-minute period when they can respond. The aim will be to wrap up at about the 90-minute mark. In the meantime, as I mentioned in the chat, let us know where you're zooming in from and feel free to chat amongst yourselves as well. The event's being recorded and the recording will be posted on the DGC YouTube channel in the next few days. And our tech guru, Julian Lung, will post the link to this channel in the chat. So thanks, Julian, for doing that. And for those who are interested, please take note that on the DGC YouTube channel, there's links to the previous All Art events, and there's been some really great ones. So take a gander at those. Just before we get the conversation started, please join me in honoring this important request and acknowledgement. Wherever you are in Canada or elsewhere in the world, please take a moment to honor our Indigenous people's long history of welcoming many nations to their beautiful territories. I'm grateful for all that we have, and I'm committed to upholding and uplifting the voices and values of our host nations. We also acknowledge those who came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. Bones of Crows is the new 5-part CBC miniseries that expands on the 2022 film of the same name. The epic tale spans 100 years and multiple generations as it dramatizes the terrible legacy of Canada's residential school system as told through the eyes of Cree matriarch Aileen Spears. It's more than just a story about trauma, violence, and abuse. Bones of Crows is also about resilience in the face of adversity and the quest for justice. For those of you who haven't yet seen Bones of Crows, I enthusiastically encourage you to do so. It's fantastic. And if you're in Canada, you can actually watch it for free on CBC Gem. You can watch the series, the miniseries, for free. I've watched the film a few times and binge watched the 5-part series, and it's incredibly layered, powerful, troubling, and beautifully realized production. So just before I introduce you to Marie and James, I want to show you the trailer clip, which will help inform the conversation to follow, especially if you have not seen the film or the series. So Julian, can you please share the trailer with the people? Thanks.
His Excellency would like to ask if any of the residential school survivors would like to take this opportunity to be heard by His Holiness.
My mother would like to speak in her language.
Aileen Spears, Nisikasun, Nya Oste, Cree Nation.
My name is Aileen Spears. I am from the Cree Nation in Manitoba, Canada.
Things are too good. I'm just scared that things will be taken away.
I want my children home where they should be.
It's the law, Matthew. You'll go to jail if you don't sign. Think of the education they will receive. If it wasn't for the church, a residential school system would never exist.
We have 324 students that will keep them in a state of malnutrition.
And if you want to motivate the Indian, you must starve him.
Naturally, we're seeing a rise in sickness.
Be careful. You're gonna see things you never forget. You gotta keep it inside you.
You didn't think your master escape would go unpunished.
I need your protection.
You're an Indian. I don't owe you anything.
You promised me that you won't look back. You are our tomorrow.
We're sending you to London, putting together a special operation.
The Germans haven't been able to crack our codes in Cree. How did you keep your language? We've been training all our lives.
There is no way that we are going to give up when we are threatened with cultural genocide.
Mom?
Then you love what you taught them was an education in unrelenting cruelty.
Thanks, Julian. So before I bring Marie and James onto the screen, onto your screens, I want to tell you a little bit about them. Marie Clements is a renowned and multi-award-winning writer, director, and producer whose decorated career has spanned film, TV, radio, and live performance. In fact, her importance as a Canadian playwright is reflected in the vast number of awards and nominations, numerous translations of her work, and the number of scholarly articles dedicated to her plays. Her 2019 dramatic feature film debut, Red Snow, received numerous awards, including Most Popular Canadian Feature at the Vancouver International Film Festival and Best Director and Best Production at the American Indian Film Festival. Marie's current slate as director includes the National Film Board documentary feature, Lay Down Your Heart, which won the Audience Award at the Vancouver International Film Festival. And as a writer, director, and producer, her feature film, Bones of Crows, premiered at Toronto International Film Festival in 2022. It also opened the Vancouver Film Festival and has screened at over 34 film festivals worldwide, garnering over 60 nominations and 32 awards. Wow. The release of her miniseries by the same name on CBC and APTN is the highest watched dramatic premiere this fall and won Best International Series at Series Fest in Denver. Aside from her many film credits, nominations, and awards, Marie has been personally honored with nominations from the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild of Canada. She is also a recipient of the Whistler Film Festival Women on Top Award, the Women in Film and Television Spotlight Impact Award, the 2019 Telefilm Canada Berks Diamond Tribute, the 2023 VGC Impact Award, and the 2023 APTN Filmmaker Award. And she has also been nominated for 2 prestigious Governor General's Awards for playwriting. Building worlds is what drives award-winning production designer James Philpott's work. After completing his bachelor's degree in art and art history from the University of Toronto, James worked in the fashion industry for several years before completing a degree in architecture at the University of British Columbia. He has integrated all these disciplines into his work over the past 30 years as a production designer. He is most noted for his work on the award-winning series Smallville and The 100, and his other cinematic credits include the soon-to-be-released Hulu series Death and Other Details, and the Bones of Crows film and miniseries both. James is known for his meticulous and grand world building, and he believes that a fully realized world sets the tone of a story and facilitates more immersive performances. James blends his background in aesthetics with thorough technical grounding in construction and visual effects, and understands that production design is the art of building the world that a story is told in. So I'm pleased to welcome Marie and James. I'm so thrilled that you guys are both here. Are you coming up on your cameras here? Hi.
It's going to say, it's going to hide, right? Yeah.
So James is in Vancouver and Maria's in Costa Rica, correct? Whoops.
Yes.
I can't believe I did there. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's such a thrill to have you guys here tonight and to be willing to give us this conversation that gives us a window into your collaborative process on the really stunning Bones of Crows. So I want to get started, and hopefully you guys can take over and I can just kind of prompt your conversation and you'll have all sorts of things to flesh out. But just on a little background, we want to focus this conversation on your creative collaboration, but to help frame just what a massive undertaking that was, and perhaps because some of tonight's attendees might really not realize that the journey that Bones of Crows took from being a proposed 4-part series to a realized feature film to a realized 5-part series. Can you share a little bit about what that process involved, and in a nutshell, the difference for both of you between the series and the film?
Marie, did you want to start with that, or just?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously we had envisioned it as a miniseries from the very beginning, and we're really fighting to make that happen and expand it into a 5-part miniseries. And we were pushing really hard to, finalize the financing and having some difficulty. And CBC suggested, why don't we look at applying to telefilm and looking at this dual storytelling, one that it could be a feature film and then also could be a miniseries. So we pursued that, and we're very, happy to get to the other side of that, and we're successful in that TV, in the screenplay. So we basically went forward with the screenplay in the miniseries at the same time. So we prepped both at the same time, and we shot both at the same time. Yeah.
So kind of following that up, I mean, obviously from a production design point of view, we had to be cognizant of both all aspects of both the miniseries and the features. So in some ways, almost we were kind of block shooting the idea of, actually 6 different scripts at any given moment. But in terms of the overall procedure of the production design, because the miniseries actually had more sets than the feature, and many of the feature elements would be within the miniseries, we kind of almost prepped the mini-series as a block shoot. So we would be cognizant of every set we would shoot. And then obviously we would have to make sure there was, if there were specific details in the feature film, that they were accounted for. And I think more to the point when the day of shooting, and this would probably be more of Marie and our DOP Vince, is that certain shots were probably held in reserve for the features, so things that were bigger and more cinematic and epic. And then obviously there was a lot of specific details that would probably go into the miniseries. And I think it was sort of really in the editing process did it all sort of come together. But from a production design, I basically had to be prepared to have everything available for every day.
Wow.
Yeah, no small feat.
Yeah. I'm jumping ahead to a question I have later on, but I wanted to ask just Jermaine right now. How long did you shoot for? Like, what was your time frame?
We shot for 60 days. We shot for 57 days, and then we had, I might be lying, I know I'm not, 57 days. And then we had, we picked up some winter shots after that. And then we were able to also add on to the story a bit with a 3-day shoot in Montreal. So yeah, I think altogether it was around 60 days. Yeah.
Well, again, I can't emphasize enough just how fantastic production it is, and I just can imagine like keeping track of everything, because the miniseries especially, things are revealed in a different rhythm than they are in the feature. So anyways, if you haven't seen it, you'll just have to go to it and watch it, because it's just fantastic. I read that everyone on the production had a relative who had gone through the residential school system, and given the specificity of so many details within the story, as well as the many evocative and really specific cultural references and symbologies, how did you two kind of parse that out, cover and share like such a deep and vast amount of information? Like, I imagine, like for you, Marie, you've been working on this for years probably, and also a lot of it comes to you from your upbringing. But it's just a massive amount of information and specific symbology that you want to honor and do properly. So and then sort of an addendum to that question, Was there any other inspirational imagery, other photography, paintings, other films that you kind of used as the reference points? So just kind of give us an idea of how you started building this world.
Yeah, we had a pretty extensive Indigenous, crew, just a posse really, obviously on screen, as you can see, but definitely off screen also, in our producing, in our producing group, and in our every department, we had Indigenous artists involved. And part of that was to represent what we feel was important to, if we're telling a story about an Indigenous POV of an experience, then it was important to have that represented on and off screen. But also, I think what it did is it just grounded us in a reality. I mean, to say that every Indigenous person on our set had family that went to residential school seems weird, but to be honest, that was the case. That's how close we are to the subject, and that's how close we were to really coming together in all aspects. Because it's just, it's one thing to do art, it's another thing to be responsible to it and to the stories of our families. So I think that was a huge part of it. But I mean, I think like all filmmakers and, all creative people, and I'll let James speak here in a moment, but we did really do due diligence. I mean, as a filmmaker, you're always getting questions, from, when you're prepping for the creative collaborations, what are the movies, what are the movies that you can reference? What is it like? And, it was really hard in that arena, because we really haven't had a lot of Indigenous stories told from our point of view of the residential school experience. And we haven't had this kind of epic 120 years of telling a story. And really, when you look at all the periods between, 1868, I believe, and 2009, you're kind of going, we really haven't seen our reflection in cinema. So it was really hard to go, oh, it's like the 1960 film, blah, 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 or it's a 1945 film here, or it's a 1990 film there. So really what I leaned on was, our family photo albums, because even though pictures might not have been taken of us, we took pictures of our families. So it became, I think, what I usually do now is, because our history can be quite separated from what people know of general history. So I usually do a historical guide, which has kind of a timeline and has all the events and all the links to the events, and kind of, I think I had a gallery pictures, historical gallery photos of maybe 200 or 300 photos that people could actually look at Indigenous people in those different periods. And of course, I collaborated with James and Vince, our DOP, and other departments, and Carmen and Wardrobe, on a mood book, that we presented to the network. And our other producers, we collaborated on this, so we could really have this succinct, it sounds strange because it's like 52 pages long, but a succinct idea of the world on every kind of, viewpoint that we were all coming together to create from. So I'll let James speak to it. I mean, obviously, our palette, collaborating with Vince, the DOP, we were very clear, hopefully, in our palette, our cinematographic, language, our tone, these things. And also we leaned into James to start fusing that together, and also Carmen, our costumes. So I think that's it for us. But I'll let James speak to it, because it was this huge document that united us in pain and beauty.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think one of the things that Marie was just mentioning was that, and this was super helpful for me, is these sort of giant family album that Marie created, and these timelines. So one of the things that I learned really early on was there is sort of, especially when you come to period, is that there's a sort of a kind of mainstream period that we understand in terms of what things look like in different time periods, like the 40s and 50s. But then there's actually almost a completely different Indigenous timeline that I think Marie was sort of indicating that hasn't been really shown that much in film and television. And so it really became very important that we started, or I started, and my decorator, Stephanie, worked towards is figuring out what an Indigenous timeline looked like, and also being cognizant that I needed to show the audience as something that they would understand as like sort of mainstream time period. But what we would do is we would work a lot with well, starting by this beautiful like timeline and the family albums that Marie created, we would do very intensive research on residential schools, anything that we could find about the different time periods and different like the home, particularly homes and things, because there isn't a lot of information about what the interior of Indigenous homes, especially in the early 20th century. But the other thing that we had a lot of access
big bug.
Was
Sorry.
no, don't worry.
There's a huge bug that just flew by me. Okay.
Oh
Go
dear.
ahead.
Okay. We had a lot of access to cultural advisors. We had on the production, we had several people who would help us with cultural advisors, but we would also have a lot of sort of elders of the different nations that we're representing. And we would sit there and we would just talk about what they remembered about their homes, some of the details of their lives. Because one of the things we really wanted to get into is what was it like to live in a home in Manitoba in 1930, and also kind of also keeping in mind that there's different levels of people, like different sort of financial classes, or not classes, but groups and whatnot. So we really wanted to sort of talk about the home. And I mean, okay, here's an example. So, I mean, we really started looking at these sort of rusticated homes, and we talked about the types of plants and vegetables that they would grow in a garden. And I mean, in this case here, at this point, one of the elders said that they also would have a teepee outside their actual house. And so those were some of the things that we talked about. And I think that really helped us was, besides Marie's album, I was just the people just talking about their experiences. I mean, I think we really kind of had to, we almost interrogated these poor people a little bit because we asked so many detailed questions about their experiences. And I mean, as an example here, we had people who came in and we discussed the sort of concept of potlatch, or not pot, but the powwow. And, we had people come and help us set the teepees up. And I mean, in fact, some of them were actually
we had cultural advisors for every nation that we represented, and then also every nation that we their land we shot on, they were also with us to make sure that all protocols we were dealing with it properly, and all representation, from anything from what color beads to what kinds of tents to how long the poles were. And I think that's what James is saying, is that it was really a really huge collaboration between a diverse group of people that came together. And I think that's what made it kind of really dynamic and very alive every day. Yeah.
And just sort of to finish with this, every time we would do a set, especially any set that had sort of any sort of cultural sensitivity, which was basically probably every set there was on the show, we would bring in an elder or somebody who would represent like a sort of a cultural advisor to just look at the set and make sure all the details were correct.
Yeah, so even placement, or even, oh, you wouldn't put that there, or your shoes would be set here or under the bed. So all, even set deck, how is this really set? Where was this folded? How was this done in residential school? And anywhere from what kind of yarn would that be? So it was incredibly detailed. And I think we kind of nerded out on that to a huge degree, but we also, we're also really grateful to have that kind of, to be able to lean into that in a huge way. Yeah.
And then, and we always sort of made sure that there were specific ideas of like one of the things that we also learned by discussing with the cultural advisors is as the century of the 20th century progressed, there was just different ideas and perceptions of sort of indigenous cultural items. At the beginning, a lot of items would be hidden or suppressed, and as the decades went forward, particularly when we came into the 1970s and 1990s in the story, there would be much more pride in items. So we would then bring items that may have been like pushed to the corner. It would start to come forward and become more present in the various sets. And so it was also trying to sort of map out again the sort of this cultural timeline of how people felt about things as well, or the social pressures that sort of came to be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, this is in the 70s. So this was a home when I'm in Toronto, and it was sort of, as it started, it sort of shifts more, like there might be more presence of things cultural as it went closer to, you know, the present day.
I'm good that the comment you made about and you showed the picture, you could see it outside, is the teepee outside of the home. I found that's an interesting detail, like how I can kind of imagine why that was, but how long did that endure? And was the teepee used as a place they would go like to just reflect or pray or just kind of feel like I'm just curious about that detail.
Well, I mean, that was something that we found was something that people would have, as you say, to sort of go and maybe reflect and sort of step out of the house. I mean, maybe even to, well, I'm not sure I would say pray, but definitely reflect. But it was interesting because as we move forward, because we also see the same house, but in the 1950s. And at that point, people didn't really have the TP anymore. And so at that point, we showed a different look. And so was a moment of time. So like this is the same house that we've just seen, but in the 1950s. And one of the things that we tried to do here is that we started to bring in a little bit more of a color palette that was kind of more the 50s, but we also started bringing in more like consumer goods that were more representative of the 1950s. And so
there.
something that we started to play with. And again, this is part of the sort of cultural timeline where there would be certain items that people would bring in, like the lawn chair. Like actually, interestingly enough, this lawn chair, I saw a photo, I believe it might have been of some of your aunts, Marie, and they were on this lounger chair, and it might have been, I think, in the 50s. And they had these great beehive hairdos. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have a lounger in front of this house. So those are actually, that was something that just inspired me. I saw that picture and I said, okay, I have to do this.
Nice. I know that you got, because of having seen this show, that you really had a lot of environments, locations, sets. Like how many sets did you actually have? I mean, just like off the top of your head, how many did you have?
Well, at one point, and we did an initial set list, and I think it did call itself down eventually, but the very first pass on our set list was 167 sets. I think some of them we folded in together, but I think we still were probably cruising at least 125 to 130 sets during the course of doing the series and the film. So a bit of work there.
And this is a three-part question that hopefully you'll show us some images, but how many did you have, like how many location sets did you have to cheat the exterior and the interiors at two different places? And also there's the makeovers, like the different periods of makeovers. And yeah, so like those are two kind of big questions. I'm just curious if we can talk about that a bit, how you guys coordinated that.
So, I mean, I guess they're sort of talking about cheating exteriors and makeovers. So I think the first one I'll talk about is the Spears house. So the house on the prairies that you've just seen pictures of, we used that for the exterior of the house for 1930s. So this house was 1930s.
And you built the house, is that correct?
Pardon?
You built it, did you? Yeah.
Actually, we found this house.
Oh.
It was a complete wreck. And what we did was, and this sort of feeds into the sort of the whole concept of flip over. We started filming the house in 1990, where the house is a broken house. I think there's some pictures of that house.
Pretty
It was,
broken, yeah.
it was all broken. And what we did was we actually, yeah, so we, that is, well, it wasn't even as nice as this when we first found it. So we added the doors and windows in there, but essentially it was kind of just like a piece of, it was falling apart essentially. And we had to actually structuralize it inside so that it was safe enough for the crew and cast and all the people to go inside. And then what we also did was in the 1990s, we also basically dressed a certain portion inside. And I think there's some pictures
Yeah.
the kind of a ruined interior with wallpaper. So we started with that. And that is where in 1990s we used the house inside and outside, and we had this type of distressed look. And then we kind of worked almost backwards because we started with the wrecked house because the house we found was fairly wrecked. I mean, obviously all this wallpaper and all this dressing we brought in. And then what we did is then we started to restore the house. So I had my painters paint that house to look like it's new logs rather than old logs. And we also, so the exterior we played for the 1930s and 1940s, but the interior for the 1930s and 1940s was, yeah, 1950s, I should say, was actually a separate location. And what we used is the wallpaper you saw was kind of our kind of piece that we used as a unifying element between all these different different time periods.
I want, yeah, I want to talk about that in a bit. I just want to carry on with this. This is pretty fascinating. I didn't realize you went backwards on this, and also that setting, the fact that you found this house to start with, and it was such a great launch pad for you, and the fact that it's in this outside, it's in BC, but it looks like it's in Manitoba. We talked about that last week when you talked like
yes.
a fantastic setting for so many of the scenes in the movie. You know,
yeah, and I mean, it
very
was
believable.
Yeah, and it was quite incredible that, and I know we did have quite a bit of conversation about that house, and I mean, sort of almost simultaneously, I think, you know, I think Marie and our DOP Vince, I think we all secretly loved that house, and it was a little bit of a convincing to kind of get our producers to sort of come on board, but eventually they did, and it was really good. I feel
Yeah,
very
we
happy.
called it the poetic house, and we
Yes,
you know, we saw so many of them, and then this one just kind of went, no, this is the house. And then of course we had to find the interior of the house where it was livable. Right? Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So
this was in a different location, you're saying?
Yes.
Yet it was still a real location. It wasn't a set.
It was a real location, and it was actually a historical museum.
Oh.
And we went in, and I don't know why they let us do this, but I'm glad they did. But we basically repainted this kitchen, and we put our wallpaper that, you know, we became our signature wallpaper for the Spears house into this historical location, and we brought in a totally redressed space. We redressed it first for the 1930s, and then we came back and added some more like kind of period 1950s elements like that. You can see we brought in some of the teal and the pale yellows and things, again, to sort of talk about period, but still within the context of sort of this other timeline.
I love that you called it the poetic house, because, and this kind of segues me to the next thing, your just kind of overall visual approach. And Marie, I know that prior to shifting into film, you spent many years in theater. And in theater, you know, visual metaphors are kind of a more common go-to than I think in films. I mean, I've used them in films. I mean, I think, James, you've been using it, but in theater, it's kind of like very common. And I'm just wondering, A, how much that influenced, you know, what you were doing, and also, you know, how much you and James maybe talked on that level, like, you know, creating a metaphor for the film and what the role of it was. And I'll just carry on just one part. Another part of that question is, when we talked last week, you spoke about the importance of wallpaper and how it was a personal childhood memory that you really wanted to include in the film, sort of as a code. And to me that really resonated, especially when I saw the series, because it's true, there's wallpaper in many places, but then also code is like this underlying theme with, like, you know, her being a code reader, and you know the map that she makes with, you know, the map with musical that she makes on top of the musical score, and just in a way as a kind of metaphor for resilience, the First Nations resilience. So I just wanted, can you talk about how much you guys spoke on that level, and how we maybe translated? I'm interpreting some of it, but just am I on base, or is there something?
Yeah, no, I think theater training, you know, how to tell story. I always looked in theater as where I laid my stories on was the environment, and the environment is the set, and the set is, you know, often theater is also part of the action, because a lot of times as an actor you're actually carting those set pieces around and moving them. So there's so many things that I think you know, I just loved about theater, and that kind of storytelling with you know, with this environment called the set. But you know, obviously cinematically, we're really trying to create frames that are undeniably fused with the drama, you know, with the action of the characters, with the emotion of the characters, with the POV of those characters. And I think that's, you know, really, I think some of our conversations were is looking at, I tend to like wallpaper because there was, you know, generations I grew up with wallpaper. And part of that, I don't know how many wallpaper stories I told, but I'll just go one that's a little nicer, was that I think when you're brought up with not a lot of money, things that you can do to upgrade your house, your family's house, and hopefully your house, is that you paint it, you know, you paint it. And often what you find are, I remember, you know, growing up, one of the coolest things was to figure out what pattern, you know, what was the coolest thing happening, and how could you update, you know, your living room or your mom and dad's living room for, you know, not as much money as totally tearing it down. So this wallpaper became this kind of new idea, or it just became this new beginning, that you were part of that generation. And so I always loved that. And then when I was young, I was used to renovate houses, strangely. And what I loved understanding is that sometimes in older houses, you have layers of wallpaper, right? And if you're the one that has to paint it or try to figure out how to get it off, you have to scrape through something that's, you know, like sometimes in half an inch or an inch thick. And you can kind of understand a family's journey within that. You can kind of go, oh, this is 1990, this is 1970, someone put this here in 1950. So it kind of goes down, you know, in the age of the house. And there's something really, I don't know, there's a code in there of relationship between what they thought, this kitchen, you know, it could just be revamped with this wallpaper, and oh my God, everything's going to look so much better, and we'll get a little knickknacks here, and we'll put this here, and we'll be, you know, with it. Right. So I've always loved wallpaper because of that. But I also think it tells a story in older houses, the layers of what happened. And I think when we're kids, sometimes we hold those images of the wallpaper because we go, oh yeah, back in, you know, when I was on my kids, you know, when I was 14 in my bedroom, I had this kind of wallpaper that was mauve and pink and white. And then, you know, and then in the living room was, you know, shag stuff, you know, with orange and brown. So I always have that kind of relationship to the backdrop of the drama that was, you know, going in all our personal lives. But I think what I think James and I had quite a few conversations of wallpaper because we jammed on that. But tell them about the wallpaper in the dining room. What's your favorite?
Why don't you ask some pictures, because there's lots of pictures.
Okay, so we have a number of sets that had wallpaper, and I think the dining room wallpaper, and we're referring to the residential school dining room, is I mean, I also love wallpaper, and I understand the idea of code, but also it gives that sort of tone and mood, and also sets a sort of idea of period. I generally like if I have an opportunity designing our own wallpaper. So this we designed for this room, and part of sort of our 1930s residential schools, we felt it was a very stark experience, particularly in the school portion. So we kind of went into almost a monochromatic concept here. But what I did, and I worked with a graphic designer, we designed this wallpaper, and it's basically it's all the papal crown. So it's the repetitions of the sort of the bees and the papal crown and the orbs of the Pope. And it's all kind of repeated over this entire wall here. But it also brings in that very sort of monochromatic palette of grays that we wanted. But at the same time, this room is not stark, which I mean, the school is stark, but we really wanted to show the dining room as a place of opulence, in contrast where the priests and the administrators of the school would gorge themselves in contrast to the starvation of the children. So this was one area of the wallpaper we used. We also, of course, we used the wallpaper in the Spears house. The other we had in one of the hotel rooms in London when we have our characters go off to war. We found this room with this really very vibrant wallpaper.
That's the London hotel room there?
Yes, and so again, it's sort of very vibrant, pattern on pattern, kind of has a bit of a very British 1940s vibe to it. This we actually found in this room, which was really very fortunate, very fun. And then the other wallpaper I know Marie and I had a bit of conversation is in the 1970s kitchen of Elaine. She's in her Toronto house. And we really wanted to set the period of the 1970s. And we had a wallpaper in her kitchen.
Julian's is probably pulling it up now.
Yeah, sorry, I know we're kind of, so I mean, this was something that we had a conversation because kind of going into an Indigenous timeline, and sometimes Indigenous timeline might aesthetically lag from mainstream. So the question was, should it be, even though this is 1970, should it be something more of the 50s? But I think Marie felt very strongly that she wanted it to be 1970s. And I think that was obviously very much what I think you were saying is like, you know, how you like to look at what is current and what is going to make the house of the time. And so this was something that was really fun. And then we got to play with a really strong 1970s wallpaper here.
It's interesting because going back to like, you know, not to sort of put too much of a heavy focus on it, but it's like, it was kind of like the coded entry ticket or something into
Exactly.
society or something like this. You get the right wallpaper, then you get in the door or some kind of thing. Kind of have that feeling to it.
Very much so. And I mean, it also set the tone. And also one of the things from the point of view of color palettes, because each of our time periods have specific color palettes and varied tones, we were able to use this as a way of pulling that into
separating them. Yeah, actually, that's a great way to segue into the color palettes, because you'd mentioned that you had a very specific palette for each period. And I told you in an email yesterday, like I threw in addition to the ones you've talked about, which I'll get you to call up, but I wanted to show the images of the black and white opening, because it's a really stunning sequence in both the film and the series, the opening sequence. And Julian, if you could just bring those two images up. Though it's like the whole, what is it, 5 minutes or something? It's a fairly, there's not much dialogue, but it's quite a stunning sequence, which we aren't going to see here. Whoops, you can't really see the whole picture here. Oh, you know, that's not one of them. No, get rid of that. There's the other. Sorry, it's the one with the boy, the back of the boy sitting in front of that same pile. Julian. Yeah, that one.
Yes.
So that's it, like that, and just to explain to people who are watching, that's actually part of a whole sequence, and you go past this, it's really stunning. At the black and white is stunning, and just the starkness and this mound of bones is incredible. And then it segues over to the rations hut, which is also a picture. So that something that you all, the cinematographer, like you two and the cinematographer, always knew you were going to kind of start the film with, was this black and white, you know, historic kind of sequence?
Yeah, we had these openings. It obviously it opened the future, but in the miniseries itself, we have these openings that look at different historical times in our history. And so they're very stylized to that period, and thematically connected to what people are going to see in that episode. So this was the beginning of, the first episode in the TV series. So it was very stark on themes of starvation and, these mountains of buffalo skulls, and kind of these bones and this, uh, this raven
Murders
and
of crows.
these crows and starvation, right? Connection between the land being things being taken from
very
every
clear.
which way. Yeah.
Julian, just want to show the picture of the rations hut too. It's just part of that sequence. So as well, I turned the picture into black and white. Your picture was blue, but within the film it was black and white, which was
and my picture, of course, I took it was color, but yes.
Yeah. So so it was such a stunning opening.
So this was we played very stark, and I mean the landscape really played into the starkness of the environment, and obviously the content was as Marie said, about starvation. And I mean, pulling it into the black and white definitely puts it into sort of the starkness of life and death. And just as I think there is a question about visual effects later, but I mean, I might as well point out since I see, I mean, the bone, like basically the pile of bones was CGI, but what we did, as you can see, is we provided a sort of collection of bones as a starting point for that pile, and that displaced the pile into the scene, and then also gave the visual effects department opportunities, and then reproducing the whole pile.
Yeah.
But also when you look at, I mean, one thing I just kind of went crazy about, which I loved what James did, is that when you look at these roofs, they weren't like this. I mean, obviously, these shapes of these buildings are authentic and they've been there for a very long time. But what James did to bring the roofs alive, which they did in that period, was really beautiful. And the vegetation on it had to wait to grow a certain time, so it was timed out to when we shot it.
Wow.
So it was very cool. Yeah.
So basically we were recreating a lot of the sort of sod roofs that would be particular to the time period of Manitoba and this area, and we did have to time it out. We had to have our greens people go up quite early, put the sod on, and then I mean, Marie doesn't know this, but what because it's still quite green, very close to the shooting date, we actually had to go in and we had to bleach it a little bit to kill it faster.
Wow, things you don't know, right? Don't
so those buildings were there as well?
The buildings were there, but we did have to do again, we had to do some renovation to it because we had to add missing pieces of the buildings, missing doors, and there were some modern elements that we had to either remove or we had to clad or paint out so that everything read period appropriate. And then of course the biggest piece for this was the sod roofs, and then providing a collection of bones in here.
My grandmother, I grew up in Saskatchewan. My grandmother grew up in a sod house. And anyway, on the palette. So then from there you break into the Spears farm, and it's you don't see it so much in your pictures, but in the film it becomes very like there's gold and light everywhere. It's really just a beautiful world. And so anyways, I want to just talk our audience here through your color palette choices.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we kind of were talking about is that we sort of started the Spears house and the Spears world, if you will, of the early 1930s. And we started by going into the 1930s in a very joyful and a very like luminous and rich way, because they sort of the powwow that you see an image of here is sort of like it's almost like a pre-residential school situation where the life was really good. I mean, people were really sort of embracing being who they are. And the powwow image here and the one you saw previously, I mean, the clothes were very colorful. And then when we segued into the house, we again played it very warm and luminous. I mean, obviously, we kind of keyed it back a little bit to sort of give it a period vibe, but it was sort of the idea of creating the home as the heart, as warmth and comfort. And it's sort of, and there's sort of a theme that would always sort of come up in the course of the movie. And I know Marie and I sort of talked about it, and it even came into a dialogue point, is it was always like something bad is coming when things are good. And so we really wanted to show this time period is good. And that was.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that, like that, and Aileen says it in the story, like when things are good, she feels, was that something that you guys kind of more like a note to self, that something always looked like luminous or beautiful or pleasant, but just it's always contrasted against what, you know, is coming? Like, was it more just kind of a note to self, or you didn't really illustrate it beyond that? Did you, like, that what was already coming in the story?
I mean, it was sort of a note to self, but it was also kind of just like in a bigger way. I think when we segue from this world into the residential school itself, which is sort of obviously the second part of the 1930s in our story, is that we really went from this luminous, beautiful world. We then went to a very stark and monochromatic and very like sad and like very severe world. And so
Juliana,
that was
could you show some pictures from that, please? The residential school.
That was very specific intention in that case. I mean, there were some other elements where it was a little bit more subtle. I mean, in the 1950s, when Elaine is in her home in the Spears house, and she's, you know, things are good, and they have some of these beautiful consumer goods from the 50s with beautiful colors, and then everything seems good, and then we segue from there into you know, I mean, well, I guess it's a spoiler, but I mean, obviously that's segues into when Adam, her husband, commits suicide.
Well, let's just look at a few more of the residential school images here, like the classrooms and the what do you call it, the infirmary and stuff like that.
There's the infirmary, and I think the dorm was a very important part of the story there. I mean, so this is, I mean, you can see how stark and kind of very well, it just lacks any comfort or warmth or any sort of sense of, you know, joy.
So again, I going back to like the question about the two of you and director of photography. I guess did you guys chart these out together and say, you know, so that everyone was kind of on board with these this flow?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think working, you know, working through kind of this mood book, but also working through just, you know, looking at emotionally what we're carving. And I think that really sets a tone. I mean, the kind of unfortunate thing is that these institutions, whether it be residential school or jail cells, or governmental offices, have a very, very particular kind of lighting to them, and they are in many ways the coldest places you ever want to find yourself in. You know, in contrast to, I think, if you come from a home where you're loved and where emotionally you're rooted to the land and rooted to the environment. So I think those things are kind of natural contrasts, just psychologically and emotionally and spiritually. And that's what we were trying to create. It's a reality. So we were trying to create that reality. Yeah.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other images you want us to look at this point for these, James, from this?
Well, I mean, I think we had
conversation.
I think the infirmary was probably the only other image that we had of the residential school, and I think we did have an exterior, but the exterior.
Oh, yeah, let's look at the exterior of the residential school, because it's an interesting image. Yeah, and it's just, yeah, it's so different than that Golden Prairie.
And this is interesting because we actually shot at the Kamloops residential school for of the school portion of the residential school, and the this image was started by photographing that residential school, but because it's been quite a bit more built up, and there's different things in front of it that this had to be then edited through visual effects to make this school read like it's sitting in the middle of the prairies.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of interesting from that point of view, where it was a combination of the location that we were using and then enhancing it.
Wow. So were you actually shooting on the inside of that school?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible.
Mhm.
But and then the grass and the stormy clouds, they were put in visual effects and post.
Yeah, and anything
Yes.
modern was cleaned up from the
Right.
outside.
But were these things that you guys, and this is part of my visual effects question, which I'll come into in a bit, but that I guess you guys knew this going in, that like, it wasn't just like, oh, we got to fix that school, like when you saw it.
Well, it's pretty hard. I mean, you know, almost I think probably a huge percentage of residential schools were isolated way off from Indigenous communities and also from cities. So I think, you know, obviously they've been built around because of urban spread and stuff, and the ones that still exist have a lot of stuff around them. So we did search long and hard, you know, for something far away, and that would kind of create this isolation of what it must have really felt like to be in this huge, you know, building, you know, hundreds away from your home in the middle of nowhere. So that's the kind of feeling we wanted, because it's a true reality of the circumstance. But you know, came to this.
And before you started shooting it, you knew what you were going to be doing with it.
Yeah, I mean, there was, you know, it's always, you know, budget, and if you had $1 million, but you know, I think we came up with a great solution. But it, you know, definitely, this is the Kamloops residential school building that still stands in Kamloops. If you go there, you'll see, you know, a huge parking lot and buildings around it, and the city built around it. But it was pretty,
so.
yeah, it was pretty stark back in the day, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
In the like the cinematography, because this and the visual effects kind of combines together, like obviously you guys collaborated really well. Were there any kind of like specific conversations that the three of you had that we have to do this, like other than what you've kind of already been talking about? But I just wondered, like, how soon did the cinematographer come into it? When did you two start collaborating, like having your collaboration in earnest, and when did the DOP get woven into that? And what were some of the first kind of key conversations or decisions you guys made as a key creative team?
Well, I mean, I think people, I mean, you know how it is. It's kind of like you're waiting for a long time for the green light, and then it hits, and then you're in go. You know, you're in go. So I think, you know, obviously Vince was brought in, you know, from from day one, almost when we got the green light, and I think we started really in earnest, trying to. You know, it sounds weird, but trying to be in the same room together, trying to be on the same page together, and just talking and verbing. And, you know, we all know, there's, you know, thousands of meetings in prep. But I think what was great is that we gelled in a way that, you know, we could continue over Zoom, we could continue over weeks and the days that followed. So really, I think we came, you know, we kind of fused fast. I think the biggest challenge, I'll say for me, in these conversations was just the quantity, you know, like, you know, when you're talking over 130 sets, you know, in 60 days, we're moving, you know, not only do you have to understand what that takes, you have to see it, and then you have to build it, and then you have to be able to shift, you know, every day before you get there, and sometimes even on the day. So I think there was this kind of fluidity that started to happen, and I hope, you know, I hope the reason, you know, obviously it was just the quality and the kind of craft of the artists involved, but also the ability to say, you know, we're not going to leave this, you know, there's no stone unturned, we're not going to leave anything behind. And that's how we all felt. So when you're with that, you know, those kind of collaborators, I think it's really muscular, because it takes a lot of energy to survive that kind of seeing every day in detail. And I think there were so many things we could all say about it, whether it's the schedule or whether it's how are you going to do that, James. But I don't need to know. I just need to know it's going to happen, and we're moving. But it was really vigorous. I think film is naturally vigorous, but I think when you're in it, and there was a moment, I don't know, probably a lot of us felt it, that we survived. We survived our shoot in Kamloops, and we're shifting to the new block. And there was almost a moment where you felt like, oh my God, we did all that. I can't believe we survived it. And then and then you look at the schedule and you go, oh my God, there's 80 more sets, and 6 more decades to make sure that we're all getting right, never mind all the other details. So I think there was something amazing about it, in that kind of idea that it was there was a lot, and there was a lot, and there was a lot, and it did not relent. And there was no days where you just kind of lean back and go, this is good, man. I can't believe we're in one place at one time, right? Because you'd be moving the next day or the next, in the afternoon, and it would, all the things of a new set come with it. So.
And before you got to that point, like going back to the preparatory stages, how long did you two get to actually work closely together? And I know sometimes probably maybe James, you got brought in for like the odd consultations beforehand. Like maybe just can you talk about that kind of how far back you went, and then how much time you actually had to actually start? Really?
Well, it was actually kind of hitting the ground running. I mean, basically, I was hired on a Friday, and then I think they wanted me to start Monday, but so I had to start on Thursday. And I mean, it was coming in, having a meeting, and then it was literally trying to build figure out how to sort of divide the show up in terms of, as we talked about, color palettes and decades and whatnot. And Vince, who, I mean, I had a very, very, very close collaboration with, came in shortly afterwards, and we really, really did discuss color palettes very carefully between all of us. And Vince and I would have a lot of conversations just between the two of us. And I know we would often share images and things, and then we had to build our sort of color palette book and our lookbook for the CPC, which I think sort of basically sort of set the framework up the show. And then of course there was quite a bit of scouting, because we actually shot in 3 different places in BC. And then it's kind of, as Marie said, it was very muscular, and it was kind of a very day-to-day situation in many cases, because our prep wasn't really as long as probably should have been, and we kind of launched into filming without necessarily all our locations locked. So there was always this sort of period of finding new locations while we were trying to shoot, or that we'd have like small gaps between shoot, like when we moved from one city to another. And it would often involve me going to a new city with one of our line producers, and I would trust my art directors and set decorator to be sending me photos, and I'd be sending photos forward to Marie and Vince about with the sets in advance, while I was in new locations, trying to look for new locations that maybe we hadn't found yet. And then the other thing is, and this was sort of, we kept losing locations as well. And I think it's interesting because the subject matter was so, for some people, was very difficult, and sometimes people would get cold feet and they pull out. And I know many times Marie would go and have to kind of talk to people, and we'd have to talk them back into locations. So it was always kind of like this fluid process. But because we kind of created this framework at the front end, it sort of allowed me to be able to say, okay, like kind of turn on the dime, but it's still within the bigger context and bigger vision of the show. And I think that was because we did have this communication. And there was many times where I'd be like texting Vince or DOP pictures and said, okay, this is what I want to do. What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. And then sending stuff to Marie. And this would be things that maybe were like the day before, or like 3 days down the road, or I'd be like, they would be shooting Kamloops and I'd be like, doing a little mini pre-scout of Victoria, look for new things that we might not have yet. And it was all that kind of stuff going on. So
wow, well, it looks really
Mm.
seamless. I mean, to me, it's incredible that you guys pulled all that together.
I mean, is quite incredible that we were able to do it, but I think, as I said, even though the prep maybe could have been longer, I think because we kind of had created a fairly strong foundation, I feel that's why things ended up working in the end.
And so just going back, because so how long was your prep? Like I hear you hit the gun running and it became a bit of a gallop. And it didn't just like prep and then start shooting, but did you have like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 weeks?
I'm going to say 6 weeks. I think we were trying to fight for 8, but I think we ended up at 6. And then we had a prep week between the 3 blocks of shooting. But like James was saying, our prep week was mostly trying to regain sets or locations that we might have lost or places that we didn't get. So we were out on the road on our in-between weeks. So in some ways that was another, those were prep weeks, but they were mostly
taken up with recovery,
strategy recovery, and trying to figure out how to win the next block. Yeah.
Wow, congratulations, that's amazing. There's something that you said that anyway, so well, that sounds fantastic that you guys just pulled all that stuff together, and it really it just looks like it looks fabulous, the show, just on every level. So
thank you.
And I think we're almost at that time when I think we don't have questions. Anything you want to just talk about the post-production visuals? You mentioned like the bones, the stack of bones, the sky and the grass. Like I felt like in the prairie scene, for example, the golden glow. Were those lifted? Were those anyway? Were colors desaturated or oversaturated? Did you guys talk about that beforehand? Did any of that happen in post?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely had we had a target going in, and then we were able to play with that in post, obviously building it up or building it down. But, just having the palette and having the kind of scope to kind of go this way or that way, I think was, another amazing part of getting to post, really, and being able to play with those colors and kind of understanding the narrative of those colors in relationship to each other, for the first time all together. So that was pretty cool. Yeah.
So even though if things happen in post, it sounds like, James, you were aware that these things were going to be adjusted based on your overall collective palette approach.
Yes. I mean, obviously, I physically would try to ensure that certain elements and certain color palettes were there physically, but I did know that there was going to potentially be enhanced through post or through the color timing through the lot or whatever the camera technique was. So it was all pre-understood.
Right. That's good, because I mean, that isn't always the case, as you probably know. Like sometimes
you
work on something and it heads off into post and you don't see it until it shows up on screen somewhere.
And you're like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this is great that you guys had that, and this is the wartime scenes, which were fantastic as well. Yeah. So, and in terms of the there's another post-production question I had, but I know, Vatican City, that was it. That, I guess that was post. You put a green screen outside the window of wherever you were and plugged in Rome.
There was a little bit like some of the hotel scenes. There was like a few shots where some elements of the Vatican and Rome would be put in, and obviously the doves in the Vatican was a post-production. But I mean, in terms of the actual scene with the Pope, that was a location we found, and we just added elements to it. And I mean, it was also carefully shot because half the room we couldn't see because there was things we couldn't get rid of and whatnot. And so, I mean, it was quite amazing how it all turned out when you see it together.
I should have asked you to, if you had any, like, we don't have them, but like, did you, I mean, and I want to get onto the questions, but did you do storyboards or did you have previs images at all that you guys kind of all shared and poked around at beforehand? Or did you?
We had a few, but I think it's fair to say when you're when shooting parts of Europe, parts of other places that are geographically radically different than BC, um, you're relying on the lie of the frame, finding those frames that can sell a larger world, and other things that can sell it. So I do think that there was quite a few restrictions, as far as you could only go this far, you could only go this way, you could only pan this far or this high. There's a thousand.
It was a bit analog,
things.
in other words.
Yeah. But I think we fought really hard to be really clever, to grab as much, to tell the story. That you could believe that you're in the Vatican, that you can believe that you're in the prairies when you're in Kamloops. I think there was some real wins.
No, it really, again, it was, I thought, fantastic. It really did. So I thought, thank you so much for sharing this. And again, I feel it's so brief and there's so much more we could show or talk about, but I know there's a few questions and I wanted to give time for that. So let me just go over the questions. I see there's 4 there and there might be a few more. So again, thanks so much for this. And
thank you.
It's been really fantastic finding out about how you made this. So the first question comes from Nikki Cole. Since you were block shooting through various periods, how challenging was it to make sure you were precise in the decor and design of the same spaces?
Well, I mean, I guess there's always a challenge with when you're changing locations or like swapping locations to different time periods, because sometimes there might be a sort of a time restriction. So for instance, like when we were doing the interior of the house, because we were block shooting that in, I think there was 3 days to do everything. So there was like overnight changes, or there would be like, like redresses while, the shooting crew was in a different part of the house. And so it's obviously very important to be super accurate in those timeframes, because I mean, those are things that, mistakes could happen really easily if you're not paying attention, and because you're very restricted. And we also had a similar situation where we had to change time periods in the Elaine's Toronto house, where we shot for 1 week, but it went through, I think 3 different time periods, and we again we're changing it, overnight, or if there's a late call and that type of thing. So it's super important to be on top of all the details.
Yeah. Wow. Just curious, how big a team did you have? I don't mean.
It wasn't a huge team. I mean, I have obviously it was. I mean, we have the art department, but obviously some of these changeovers would be with set tech department, which I mean, we had our set decorators Stephanie Lee, and then we had I think she had 1 buyer and she had 4 dressers. It was a very tight group.
Wow, that is pretty small. Really?
Yes.
And some dailies, surely.
Some dailies, and I think sometimes we got a second buyer.
Oh,
so
wow, that's incredible.
Pretty, I mean, there was a lot of energy that everyone had to put in to make sure everything was super accurate. And I know there was oftentimes I would have to come in and I would be like, oh, I don't know if this is right. And, you'd be standing there looking at a piece of furniture and you'd be Googling it and saying, okay, that was made in such and such, we're good. Or, oh, that's like later, so just get rid of it. What else do we have?
Oh, wow. That's a small team. So, and on that note, and I'll go to the rest of the questions, but on that note, so what was the budget of the overall project? And then what was your art department budget? And I realized, let's just talk about the series, because that's kind of, you said you were building for the series in a way.
Yeah, I mean, altogether, the film and the series, I think, was $21 million. Yeah.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
And then how much did you get of that, James?
I'm almost embarrassed to say. I mean, I'm gonna just be honest. Everyone really pulled the things out of a hat. I mean, we had construction, we had like, I think it was just over $400,000 in total. And originally I should, the infamous they, but I was asked to try and do it for substantially less, and I had to push to get to that number. And then set deck, I think we had about 450 for acquisitions, and then labor on top of that, and as it was a small team. So it was really, I mean, people, not only did we have to be super accurate, we had volume assist, but we had to be really smart with how we handled things.
Mhm. Wow, congratulations again. Next question, Tracy Traeger. Where are these buildings with the cow skulls in the foreground? That's going back to that, the opening sequence. What location?
That is in Kamloops, and it's, I can't remember the road, but we would often drive along in country roads and when we were scouting, and it was like, look there, and then, you know, the car would screech stop and we'd get out and we'd look, and then it was, it was one of the, it was like kind of a country farm, ranch style thing that was just outside of the city limits of, in Kamloops.
And Tracy has another question. The log cabin looks more like Alberta than Manitoba. I don't know, Tracy. I think you're splitting hairs here. I read that this show was shot in Kamloops, and that's so. Anyways,
yeah, they had the same. We did scout in Manitoba also, but they did have the very same, or at least to my eye.
I grew up in Saskatchewan.
Very same.
Okay,
very same cabins. Yeah, they were quite remarkable how they have withstood time. It's kind of amazing, right?
Yeah. Like it's the old adage that farmers don't tear things down; they just let them fall down.
Well, I mean, that's actually an interesting point, because a lot of the buildings had fallen down, and these ones we renovated to bring up. But often buildings had fallen down. We would use some of the materials and lumber from fallen down structures to build the new pieces we needed for the sets that we did use.
Joel Reimer has a question. Has Bones of Crows gotten any attention from, been submitted to, been recognized by the Academy? I assume, Joel, do you mean the Canadian Academy? During the Golden Globes, Lily Gladstone received an award for her work in Killers of the Flower Moon, and her speech was monumental. I've since seen it. I felt that Bones of Crows could win an Academy Award, and I'm wondering if you think it could potentially get in there. Would it be able to fit into the Hollywood category, or would it be a foreign film as Canadian?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously it can't. I mean, it is Indigenous and we are in Canada, so you know, we do have some barriers. So yeah.
But couldn't it be considered entered as a foreign film? I mean, it's already last year, the feature film.
Yeah, it's already so last year.
Yeah.
I know.
That's the question.
But it is again so fantastic. Yeah. But yeah, it has still a chance for, like, next year the series can be up for DGC awards and Canadian Screen Awards and that's all, right, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Okay. As an anonymous attendee, I think we kind of answered this. Can we know what the budget was for the production design, people versus art? So it kind of, you talked about your size of your team, which wasn't very big.
Though I do think that one of our producers is in the chat, and she might correct me a little bit. So I'm not sure exactly, but a small group. Small group.
So yeah, how big was your construction and paint team? Just curious, because they were obviously all over.
I mean, the thing was, it was kind of, I mean, this is why it's really kind of difficult to sort of quantify all of it, because we had different people work on different phases of the show. And sort of to say that we had a specific team, because we had a group of people that worked with us when we were in Kamloops, and then we had a different group of people that worked with us in Victoria, and again, a different group of people who worked with us in Vancouver. So to sort of say what the group of people is, I think it's kind of hard for me, because I mean, often I wouldn't see everybody, and it wasn't sort of, as I say, a fixed group. And it was also a rotating situation within art departments. I mean, we would spread a lot of the work around amongst many different people. A lot of people that I worked with on other shows would donate a certain amount of time they had between another project or something like that, because everyone was really very keen to be involved, because it's such an important issue. And I was really pleased to have people that were able to give their talents to the show. So, I mean, if I listed everyone, it would look like a massively large team, but not everyone worked concurrently.
Understood, yeah. Wow, that's a challenge in itself, you know, just it kind of spreads you like butter, doesn't it?
It was a little bit, I mean, I kind of, in some ways I like having lots of different people, particularly graphic people, because everyone has a different point of view and it's also, everyone has talents and it's really great to have as much talent as possible whenever.
Yeah, I guess just going back to one of the initial questions, though, because again, going back to the cultural specificity and just like, you know, that book you put together for everyone to look at, Marie. I mean, yeah, as new people came in, they wouldn't have had the benefit of the time to you know, take all this in. So you would have had to convey the shorthand, I guess.
I would, and then because often it was be giving specific projects, so we would have projects that would be very particular to like cultural issues, and then there would be a lot of material that would be sort of more generic and general, like, you know, cigarette packages and liquor bottles. I mean, that would be something that, but there would be a lot of artwork that we would do in various things, and one of the things we really tried to do is wherever possible, commission the different artwork from either Indigenous artists or sometimes some of the communities we worked with would create art for us. And we would always try whenever possible to have the artwork created by the community, and not only the artwork itself, but even if we can have the final product created by the community, that would also be ideal.
There's another question here. We sort of talked about it too. How many days it took to prep, shoot, and in post? So you shot for 57 days-ish, right? Plus some pickup days in Montreal and in winter.
Yeah.
And what about posting? Like, how long was your post and editing period?
I don't think I'm lying to say that it was a year. It was pretty close to 12 months. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it was a large post, obviously, because it was the feature film, it was the 5-part miniseries, and also we also did it in Cree and in French and in English. And you know, it was a huge undertaking. So it was a very yeah, it was just a big post.
Wow.
Big
Yeah.
post.
So when
Yeah.
when did you shoot it? Like, when was it? 2022, the spring?
Good question. It was during COVID, so what do you think, James? Was it 2022? It's funny how that time for everybody just kind of wipes
We
us
actually,
out, right?
it was actually
Yeah.
2021 we shot
Wow.
because
Really?
Wow.
I think it was it was July to
Okay.
December, and then I think there was a few days in January of the following year that we went back to Kamloops for the winter shots. So
Yeah. And then we went to Montreal, I think in April or May. And then we went into post proper. No. Yeah, I you know, timeline, I'm so sorry. I just kind of get wiped out by that time, probably because I was in this world, but also because it was part of another world order. But definitely we, you know, we did have a very yeah, we shot till probably December 23rd and picked up a few days in that January. And then that year was all post for all the different deliverables and all the variations of those deliverables. So
Wow. Well, again, impressive work on everyone's part. And there's no other questions there. So is there anything else that you guys can think you want to share that was like maybe an anecdotal thing or a particular thing, or just parting comments?
I mean, I think everyone is really proud of this show, and I mean, maybe this is an anecdote, but I think I would say that, you know, consistently through the whole show, like that everybody would say, you know, this is a story that's worth telling, and everyone put their full efforts into everything that we did.
Yeah, I think it was a, you know, one of those grand experiences where, you know, from from the different networks and from the funders and from our core group of producers, all the way through all the creative teams, all the actors, it just kind of something like this can't happen unless everyone buys into it, not only because they want to be challenged or believe in the story, but because I don't know that they're responsible to it. And I kind of feel that everybody gave everything. And it was just one of those projects where if you didn't, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
It was so huge that I think it took everyone's everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone
yeah.
gave everything they had.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the things in the chat. Thank yous there, if you guys can see them. Carla Ray, I think she's in the film, isn't she?
Yes, she is. Yes, she is. That beautiful.
I'll just read a few. Thank you for all the hard work to make this the masterpiece that it is. That's from Carla Ray. Chris Lee, a friend of mine who lives in BC. I really enjoyed the movie, and thanks to the entire production unit for all your amazing work to produce such an important movie series and with such beauty on every level. Chad Valaquette, this was a wonderful experience listening to you folks, and somebody that is doing motion graphics now, you folks make me want to quit and go back to doing graphics for set. It looks so stunningly beautiful, just incredible. Beautiful work, looking forward to watching the show. I need to see this project, both the miniseries and the feature. Congratulations on succeeding. So anyways, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will watch it again. It's stunning work, seamless, and the heart that you guys have described that went into every moment of it is very clear. It's just such a strong piece visually and story-wise, editing, everything from top to bottom. So thank you so much for putting that out into the world. Very important work. And thank you also for being part of this. I love doing these all events and bringing people together so you can share all the wonderful work you've done. And again, in the chat, Julian will put the link for the DGC YouTube channel. If it isn't there, you can Google it. And this recording will be up in a few days. And yeah, thanks again for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you a little bit during this, the prep for this.